Welcome back to another episode of Flavors and Knowledge, the podcast where we dive deep into the art of cooking, the science behind ingredients, and the rich stories that make food so much more than just a meal. I'm your host, Noah Mitchell, speaking from Chef Walter's Cooking School in Rhode Island, USA, bringing you narrated, factual culinary education with honest food talk and a few opinions along the way. So let's explore the diverse world of flavors together. This episode is titled, The Day Rhode Island Gasped. Columbus Day 1910, the Fabre Line, and the Italian immigrants who transformed Natick and Pontiac. If you had stood along the main road through the villages of Natick and Pontiac in the early 1900s, you would have heard a medley of accents and languages. The British, the Irish, the Swedes, and the French Canadians had all come before, each group finding its place in the textile mills that lined the Pawtuxet River. But by the dawn of the 20th century, it was the Italians who were arriving in ever-growing numbers, and they were the latecomers. As many historians have pointed out, their experience followed a familiar pattern. They took the lowest-paying jobs, lived in the poorest housing, and clung fiercely to their ethnic identity. In the crowded mill villages of Rhode Island, this was simply what happened to each new wave of strangers. Of course, Italians were no strangers to the New World. Long before the mills of Natick ever hummed with machinery, Italian mariners had charted the very course to the Americas. Think of Christopher Columbus, Amerigo Vespucci, John and Sebastian Cabot, whose family name was really Caboto, and Giovanni da Verrazzano. Their ships had opened the Atlantic like a book. Even in the earliest colonial days, Italian families had found their way to what would become the United States. The Tagliaferro family, for instance, settled in Jamestown, Virginia, within just a year of Roger Williams founding Rhode Island. And when the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776, one of the men who put his name to it was William Paca, a Maryland delegate of Italian heritage. Later, during the Civil War, 3 Italian Americans rose to the rank of general on the Union side. So the Italian presence in America was nothing new. But the great tide of immigration that would reshape places like Natick and Pontiac was still to come. That tide began to swell in the 1860s, when the demand for labor to build the Transcontinental Railroad drew thousands of workers from southern Italy, as well as from Ireland and China. One of those men was Carmine DiFranco. He came to help lay track, lived for a time in California, and eventually settled in Natick, where he opened a small grocery store that catered to Italian tastes and needs, a quiet sign that a community was taking root. Yet the major impact of Italian immigration in New England was not truly felt until the early 20th century. Southern Europe's economy had soured, while Rhode Island's textile mills were desperate for cheap, willing hands. The pull was irresistible. Once the influx began, Italians arrived in numbers no one had quite anticipated. Charles Carroll, in his book Rhode Island, 3 Centuries of Democracy, captures the moment of awakening perfectly. He writes that Rhode Island scarcely realized the volume of Italian immigration until the first observance of Columbus Day as a public holiday in 1910. What had been expected to be just another parade, in a city already known as the dingiest city, turned into something far larger. For hours, Carroll says, Italian divisions poured through the city streets in rapid succession. And then he delivers the unforgettable image. The whole state gasped at the discovery, rubbed its eyes to test the reality of what seemed plausible only as a dream. In a single day, Rhode Island had become conscious of its Italian population. But consciousness, unfortunately, soon curdled into fear. The migration continued at an unrelenting pace until 1921, when prejudice in Washington finally found its voice. Congress passed an Emergency Quota Act in 1921, followed by the National Origins Quota Act in 1924. These laws were aimed squarely at Italians, Jews, and Slavs, and they succeeded in slowing the flow from southern Europe. Even so, between 1898 and 1932, nearly 55,000 Italians arrived at the port of Providence alone. That number is all the more remarkable when you consider that the demand for immigrant labor had become so great that the Fabre Line, a French shipping company, chose Providence as its chief port in 1911. The U.S. government promptly established an immigration station at State Pier No. 1, and from there, thousands upon thousands of immigrants from Italy and Portugal stepped onto American soil. The Fabre Line's ships left Marseille, France, and made stops in Italy, Portugal, and the Azores before reaching Rhode Island. So many of these newcomers came from Campobasso, a province near Naples, that a man named David Senerchia was able to start his own company dedicated to bringing workers from Campobasso's Fornelli district directly to the mills of Natick and Pontiac. And yet, for all the economic necessity that drove this migration, the human reality was harsh. The sudden arrival of so many strangers, speaking a foreign language, wearing unfamiliar clothes, observing different customs, met with resistance, hatred, and prejudice in the villages, mills, and even the churches of the Pawtuxet Valley. Much of the trouble stemmed simply from the sheer number of newcomers packed into just a few decades. In many cases, the Italians clustered together in separate enclaves, carving out their own sections within the villages. Natick and Pontiac became prime examples of this. As the Irish, French, Canadians, and Swedes moved on to better opportunities, the Italians moved into the old company housing. They accepted the jobs the other groups no longer wanted. They worked for lower wages. And for all their willingness, they found themselves segregated, discriminated against, and treated as outsiders in the very mills and villages they were helping to keep alive. Ultimately, dear followers, thanks for listening and the privilege of your time. In conclusion, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for joining us on today's journey through flavor and discovery. You'll find all the relevant links in the show notes, including details on our cooking classes, the full notes and recipes from this episode, and our calendar for culinary tourism tour. Be sure to subscribe to our free newsletter to stay connected and informed. Remember to taste thoughtfully, cook with passion, and continue exploring the boundless world of food. Subscribe for more, share with a fellow food enthusiast, and we'll see you in the next episode. Until then, keep your eyes on the fire and stay curious. The content for this episode is written by Chef Walter and produced by Simval Media, USA.